I want to dispose with some formalities first, because this is just ridiculously cool. Sweet! I was actually hoping in Shaheen's introduction she would have mentioned that I'm actually from the Bronx, New York. Because I think it's kind of cool being from the place where hip-hop was born. And so I'm going to come back to not the hip-hop piece, but the Bronx piece in a second. By the way, that phone works on the Android network by Google, and that's actually where I'm going to start. I live in Silicon Valley, and literally from our house, I would say it's probably 3 miles to Apple, 3 miles to Google, and like 4 miles to Yahoo. So we live in this crazy nexus of technology. So we get access to a lot of amazing people who are doing amazing things and think outside the box. I had a chance to meet one of them. He's the very first employee of Google. I know you're thinking billions right now, but he is so cool. And he told me one thing I thought was very interesting in a conversation. I was trying to figure out what Google is up to, and I said to him, what's the next big thing? What are you trying to figure out? And he said this. He said, I'm trying to figure out how to beam someone from one starship to the next. But just think about that for a second. When you think of education transformation, we often think about, let's say, Michelangelo, the way he approaches David, that he wants to chisel it out of stone. He kind of knows what the end product is. But education is no longer like that. Education should be about helping children think and create things that we cannot imagine today. That's really hard for adults to get in their minds. Really difficult. So what Craig said in jest to me actually is very profound when it comes to education. And it had me go back to an article by Michael Young, a professor at the University of London. He wrote a paper trying to respond to this question: what is education for? I was actually invited to speak on a panel about this, which is very funny, being a kid from the South Bronx, New York, in London, trying to tell people what this means with no PhD, no master's degree. And sitting next to a professor basically did my talk before me. So I try to refer to that Star Trek story and then to get away from what I was perceiving in this audience, and then talk more about this. In the first video we saw of Ken Robinson talking about education, he didn't quite hit this point, but education originally was built because very wealthy people wanted to help other wealthy people find out what other wealthy people knew. So it was the knowledge of the powerful. And realize there was, I'm the darkest person in this room, so I can say this. So black people were definitely not included in that. And by the looks of the audience, a lot of you females were not included in that figure either. But thank God we've evolved. And we've evolved to the point where we now believe in powerful knowledge. And we believe that everybody should have access to powerful knowledge. And so we go about trying to create education that helps kids of all different backgrounds gain this knowledge. But what's interesting is that no matter where you go, and somebody said this earlier, so it's funny, people stole everything I wanted to say, so I'm sorry that this is maybe a little bit redundant. I know people copied my PowerPoint. But in the United States, there's a crisis in education. But there's also this crisis in India, and there's a crisis in South Africa. There's crisis in education everywhere, and when you boil it down to what I really feel like the crisis of education goes back to that comment about knowledge of the powerful. There are simply too many people today that have access to great schools solely because of the financial resources they have access to. And that's created a gap that is increasingly growing because we haven't figured out ways to address it. Let me take that back. We actually have figured out ways to address it. The question is, do we have the will? And more importantly, do we believe? I don't believe that there are any silver bullets to this. I do believe that one thing we need to do is invest in leadership. Where you see education transformation that has the greatest impact on kids of poverty, there is a great leader behind it. Plain and simple. Of course, there's great teachers involved, and I think Norman Atkins talked very deliberately about that earlier. There are great teachers involved, no doubt. But you gotta have school leaders that have the vision to create institutions or organizations that are malleable, that will help students not only gain the knowledge of, gain powerful knowledge, but also able to think beyond what we think of today as what's possible. So I'm going to start by giving you an example of what I really mean by this and the impact of leaders. Everybody knows what this is, right? It's the number 4. In the community I grew up in South Bronx, New York, and let me give you some context. The community I grew up in South Bronx, New York, in the 2000 census, the US Census, it was the poorest district in the United States. So let me repeat that to you. According to the 2000 census, Congressional District 16, the community I grew up in, the community my family and my mother still lives in, is the poorest district in America. 42% of the 1.4 million people that live in the South Bronx, New York, are below the US poverty line. Below the US poverty line. So this number 4 means, so I believe anecdotally that I knew the other 3 people in my housing projects, so it's low-income projects, you would call it kind of slums here, who were thinking about going to college. Dwan, Stooks, Tina, and Sherry, and me. That was it. Those are the people that I knew who were going to college. But people believed in me. I had a mother who worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. She was incredibly hardworking, and she had one thing that a lot of mothers in developing countries don't have. She had a high school education. That's remarkable. When you educate a woman, most likely they're going to teach all their kids how to read. And that's what my mother did. She taught us how to read. So she believed. And I had sort of a guardian angel. My best friend, who turns out to have gone to my high school, his dad, Michael Pollack, was my mentor. He actually exposed me to opportunities outside of the Bronx, New York. So I got to see a world that most kids in the Bronx don't get to see. True story, I learned how to drive on a Rolls Royce because of this guy. So just imagine being a black kid in the South Bronx driving like a Rolls Royce. Woo! Slumdog Millionaire. But there were people out there that believed. But one thing that I had a school that I got into, a very prestigious private school. It's one of the best private schools in America. It's called Riverdale Country School. And I went for free. So I got this scholarship to go to this school for free. So I had my mother, who gave me the grounding. I had Michael Pollack, who exposed me to great opportunities. And then I had this school where people paid to go to this school so that all their kids go to college. It was remarkable. I was really lucky, kind of like an outlier. I don't like the outlier status, and I don't like the outlier status because when we praise outliers, that means that we don't believe that more kids can actually attain the type of education I received. And that, to me, is a big problem. In 1995, a school starts in the same community, Congressional District 16, where I grew up. Enrolled in that school is my niece, Nicole Britton. And they make a promise to these 10-year-old kids. These are 10-year-old kids, right, in the South Bronx, New York. Some crazy guys make this promise to them that they're all going to go to college. Now, realize, there are 40 kids plus enrolled in this school, and I only know 3 other people in my neighborhood who went to college. This school has since put over 960 kids on the path to college in the same neighborhood I grew up in. 13 years later, that's remarkable. That's less than a generation. And it was these 2 guys. On your right, Dave Levin. On your left, Michael Feinberg. We'll get back to the Indian gentleman in the middle. That's Gaurav Singh. And they started KIPP, the Knowledge is Power program, with roughly 50 kids in a classroom in Houston, Texas. Those guys actually believed that kids from the lowest income communities in the United States could actually climb the mountain to college. And not only climb the mountain to college, but be successful in college and beyond. So they believed. But it turns out they were not the only believers. They actually went out and found other people who also believed in this crazy idea that low-income kids can do anything, given the right type of school environment. And they provided leadership training so that they could actually start KIPP schools in other cities. And today there are 109 KIPP schools in the United States. So when you look at 4, you look at 960 in India, you think that's not really a big deal. But when you look at 100 schools, that 85% of students from these communities are on the track to college or gain admission to college, that's beautiful. That's now talking a little bit more like the scale that you want to talk about in India. But KIPP is not alone in this work. Uncommon Schools, you heard Norman Atkins talk earlier. Yes, College Prep. I love this place. It's in Houston, Texas. These guys do great work. I think they have about 11,000 kids on a track to college, one of the best high schools in the United States of America. And almost all their kids come from low-income communities. So they're closing the achievement gap. This is one of my favorite schools. This is why I quit my job at Room to Read. I met a guy named John Gilmore in South Africa who had started a few schools in townships in South Africa. And get this, out of all the students enrolled in their now 4 schools, 98% passed the high school exit exam, right? 60% qualify for university in a community where less than 1% on average make it to university. 60% of their students. And I was like, wait a second, so let me get this straight. You were doing KIPP. When KIPP was doing KIPP in the US, you were doing this LEAP stuff separately. And that's when the aha moment came. The aha moment was that there are people in a whole lot of places trying to do this work. And there's something maybe we could do at EdVillage to help that along. So we found some other schools that we thought could be interesting partners. And we haven't partnered with all of them yet, but one of them that we are so excited about is Akanksha. One of the best things about Akanksha is that they believe. And it turns out that belief is half the battle. So there are people in the United States and India and South Africa and in a lot of other places that simply believe. And what we feel that we can do at EdVillage is identify those education entrepreneurs that believe and now want to take action. And through a partnership we have with KIPP, provide access to great school leadership training, contextualize it, because we certainly don't want to be the ugly American and be like, yo, this is how you need to do it. Because what we're starting to find out is that we know how to do certain things really well, and it turns out that other people know how to do some other stuff really well that we can learn from. Oh, it's like a surprise being American, right? We can learn something from somebody else, but we can. It's awesome. Ross, Gaurav, and Bonasile are in our Global Fellows Program. It's a partnership we have with the KIPP Foundation to train educators who want to start high-performing schools in low-income communities. Bonasile is from Langa Township in South Africa. He grew up in the community, is a principal of the school, wants to make it the highest performing school as he possibly can, serving kids in Langa. It's great. Ross, it was great watching him talk about his vision and saying, I'm the oppressor. In apartheid South Africa, that's what he was, but now he owns it. He says, I don't want my kids to ever feel that way. So I'm creating a school in Diepsloot for kids in Diepsloot. Gaurav Singh, you've already heard Norman talk about him. You know, it's funny as an American and living in Silicon Valley, when you meet somebody who really thinks like a Silicon Valley person, but works in Mumbai and says something to you like you're going to start 100 schools, the first thing you do is kind of smile and laugh and say, you're crazy. Then you meet Gaurav and you're like, okay, wait. I think we can help you fix that. We can help you do that 100 schools. We think you're going to do it, so we're going to help you out in this case. And so those global fellows look at the slums of Mumbai. They look at Diepsloot, and what they see is a potential for kids to climb the mountain to and through college. This is the University of Cape Town. It's one of the best universities in the world. IIT, some of the best universities in the world. We think that the greatest untapped potential is here and here, and they can make it there. The question that I have for you is, do you believe? We certainly do, and we hope that if you are amongst that believing class, that you will take on the mantra of helping more kids beat the odds, attain university, and do things that we have yet to imagine. They will be the kids from the slums of Mumbai, the kids from townships in Cape Town. Those are the kids that are going to figure out how to be my molecules from one starship to the next. And I guarantee you that that's going to be the case. Thank you so much.